How's it going, YouTube? It is the Dual Threat Podcast here, your daily news source for all things sports. My name is Drew, and this is my co-host.
My name is Jacob. Everybody, how is it going?
Make
Beautiful
sure
day.
to subscribe. It is a beautiful day. Thank you very much, Jacob. Make sure to comment if you have some disagreements here. We're going to come with some hot takes today. We've got I believe this is our third segment this year, maybe our fourth, of how teams can make the playoffs. We've got one two-loss team, and then we have three teams in the same conference that we're just going to kind of touch up on because they're really in the same scenario, but we'll explain a little bit on that later. But first, we're going to go to the two-loss team here, and that is the ranked number 19th Kentucky Wildcats. Yes, it is true. They can still win the SEC East, even with their two losses on the schedule. Let's talk about how they can do that and how they could make the playoffs if they do end up doing that. Jacob, do you want to start us off for this one?
Sure. I would love to. All right, everybody. Kentucky coming off I talked about it in the video yesterday. Defensively, a dominant game. Absolutely dominant. You give up 10 points to Mississippi State's offense. I mean, that is elite when we talk about Will Rogers being probably the third highest quarterback in the NFL draft this coming season, maybe fourth behind Kentucky's quarterback. But, we're talking about an absolutely great air raid, throw the ball around the field offense that Kentucky shut down, really. It's 10 points, like we said. They scored 17 total. 7 were on a pick 6, but, they've looked great. So, with that being said, this week, big game. They go to Knoxville, and they play the Tennessee Volunteers. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, they got to win. Obviously, that's how college football works. They got to win this game. But not only do they have to win this game, they have to win on – I'm sorry, everybody. I misspoke. They're on bye this week. But the same thing applies for next week. They play Tennessee next week, and they have to win that game. They have to go into Knoxville, beat Tennessee, just like Alabama almost did. Then they play Missouri, Vanderbilt. Those should be no-brainers. And then they play Georgia. So they have to beat both Tennessee and Georgia, and win the other 3 games in their schedule. So that puts them at 10-2. So what else needs to happen? That would put them – the teams that they're currently behind in the SEC are Tennessee and Georgia that are undefeated. And so that means that they both need to lose one more game, because when Kentucky beats both of them, they'll have the head-to-head. So if all 3 of them are 10-2 and Kentucky has beat both of them head-to-head, then they will be the third team, or the first team, sorry. So where did they get that other loss? Georgia and Tennessee, good for Kentucky, they play each other later. And so that means that Kentucky beats both of them, one of them beats the other, and that means one of them is guaranteed to have 2 losses under these assumptions, right? So Georgia will probably beat Tennessee. So they need Georgia to lose to either Florida, Mississippi State, or Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's probably out of the picture. Florida at home is probably not going to be too tough of a game for Georgia, if we're just being honest. So at Mississippi State is really where you need Georgia to lose. But if they can pull it off and Georgia loses to Mississippi State and Tennessee, and beats Tennessee, and then Kentucky beats both of them, then they're sitting atop the SEC East. Drew, what else are you thinking about? That's how they win the East, but from there, they pretty much have to win the SEC, right? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. They got to win the SEC. But I think just generally talking about the game at Tennessee, people may just count that as a loss already. But Kentucky's defense might be the most underrated defense in the country. They have not allowed a team to score 30 points on them. And if you look at the offense they've had to play, they played Florida. At Florida, they held them to 16 points. They played at Ole Miss, held them to 22 points. I believe 6 of those came off of 2 field goals on a turnover. So really, you can just say they only allowed 16 points to Ole Miss. And then they have played Mississippi State, who we know is pass heavy and can easily score 60 points on you any given moment. And so holding them to only 17, I think this is the most underrated defense in the country. They allowed South Carolina to score 24 points, but I would argue that's because their quarterback was not in the game. And so if you look at the possession time and the amount of first downs Kentucky got, it's kind of the same situation as, say, A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas. It was very skewed in one way because of the backup quarterback, in that it was way more weighted because of that backup quarterback. So they had a lot less time, possession, they allowed more points, and they still only held them to 24 points. And so you really have to consider that Tennessee has not played a defense like Kentucky's up to that point. They scored 52 points on Alabama, but Alabama's defense doesn't look all that great this year. And I would argue Kentucky's defense is probably better. And so Alabama's defense had the best stats in the SEC going up to the Tennessee game, but that's because they hadn't played an offense yet in the SEC. I mean, their best offense is probably Texas A&M, who's, I mean, let's face it, they don't have an offense. So at Tennessee is very likely, to be honest with you. I mean, this will be a game that I think will shock a lot of people because, yes, Hendon Hooker has looked phenomenal this year, and they just beat Alabama and scoring 52 points. But I think Kentucky's defense is better than theirs. So I think we should, maybe give them a little credit. Versus Georgia may be a little harder, but then again, Georgia hasn't played anybody this year, so we're not really sure how good they are. Now, what I'm looking at is if all of these scenarios were to happen, you got to look across the country here. You're looking at a 2-loss SEC winner, but you're looking at Kentucky. That is a very odd statement to say that there would be SEC bias for a Kentucky Wildcat football team. This isn't basketball, ladies and gentlemen. They won't have the committee weighted helping them out in this scenario, I believe, because they're more blue blood related. And Kentucky in football, no matter how good they are in basketball, they are not blue bloods for football. So here's what you need. You need a 2-loss Big 12 winner that's not Texas. If it's between you and it's between Texas, I think Texas gets the edge over you just because of that blue blood bias. I think if they're playing Alabama in the SEC championship, they would have the head-to-head win there. And so maybe you need Alabama. No, that would be their second loss. So you would have the head-to-head. You would be good there. So what you would need is Penn State already dropped one. I think you would need Michigan maybe to drop 1 or 2, just so they don't slide in as a conference division runner-up, especially if Ohio State wins the Big Ten and they just dominate, and Ohio State versus Michigan is a close game. But that's what you need. You need Utah maybe to win the Pac-12. They already have 2 losses. I think if it's between Kentucky and it's between Utah, you have one opponent that you each played and you beat at Florida. They lost at Florida. So I think you get the edge over them. Now, if it's between you and Oregon, I think you also get the edge because you beat Georgia. They lost to Georgia. They got dominated by Georgia. So you get the edge over them as well. And so this is a very likely scenario, if you were to win out, that Kentucky is pretty much a lock, in my opinion, if everything goes the way that they're supposed to throughout the country. I mean, you're knocking out Alabama. You would maybe need Ole Miss or something to lose a few more games. You just don't want a 1-loss non-conference champion in another place. But I would even argue you'd probably get in over them because you win that conference. I'm saying in another conference, that's probably the most likely scenario. So you need Michigan maybe to lose, either get dominated by Ohio State or maybe lose to another team that they're not supposed to. But other than that, in the field that we're looking at in college football right now, Kentucky has a pretty good chance if they beat Tennessee, Georgia, and most likely Alabama, Ole Miss, whoever wins the West, because honestly, it kind of looks a lot more wide open than I thought it would be at this point, but Alabama is still the favorite there, so we'll just go ahead and assume that. So you got anything else for Kentucky here, Jacob?
Yeah, I just really quick, I agree there's no SEC bias for Kentucky. The only thing that I think is we're talking about a team that will have beaten Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee by the end of the year. And so maybe Kentucky doesn't get the bias, but with how much the committee loves those other teams, then a win over them and a loss, one of your losses coming without your quarterback and the other coming when, like we've talked about extensively on here, a game you should have won. I don't know. I think I don't even think it needs to be as close as you're kind of making it seem. I think one loss Michigan, maybe you have a thing, but like I don't know. I mean, most other scenarios, I think a one loss conference champion is gonna get beat out by the SEC champion. Honestly, pretty close to no matter who it is, but maybe we'll see. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. We got to beat Tennessee next week, and then we'll go from there. But all right, well that's the first one. The next one, I mean, Drew and we're the dual threat podcast. But now we're going to switch it into a little triple threat for how the next team can make the make the playoff. And we're going to talk about the winner of the American. Okay, so as of right now, Cincinnati and Tulane are both one-loss teams in the American, both ranked. UCF also one loss, not ranked yet though. So I mean, these teams, it's relatively straightforward their path because they all have like 5 or 6 more games and they're all American games. So they're pretty much all just going to play each other and one team will be at the top, most likely. So in this scenario, any of these teams coming out on top of the American being 11, 12 and 1, that's pretty straightforward. It's less like Kentucky, someone has to win, someone has to lose. It's less that and more just we're talking about the winner of the American. One of these 3 teams, if they're 11 and 1, 12 and 1, win the American. What else needs to happen in college football? So last year we saw Cincinnati get in. They were undefeated though. So it's a little bit different of a landscape. They don't have one loss like Cincinnati does to Arkansas this year, but that's a pretty decent loss. So now we get to the point where do we need 2-loss conference champions? Would a 1-loss bad looking conference? I guess a 1-loss Power 5 champion, there's no way. So I guess that really comes down to you need Cincinnati. I mean, Clemson's probably not going to lose 2 games if we're being realistic. The ACC's weak and they look dominant against everyone they play so far. You need maybe a 2-loss SEC winner. You need the SEC loser to not be 1 loss. I mean, if Ole Miss goes 12-0 and then loses in the conference championship, they're still going to get in over Cincinnati. You need a 2-loss Big 12 winner that's not Texas, probably, just because of all the ifs and ands that everybody's giving Texas. You need a 2-loss Utah to win the Pac-12. Drew, what else are you thinking? I mean, aside from 2-loss winners of the conference, do you think there are 2-loss winners that still get in? I mean, Utah is a 2-loss team that just beat a really good USC team. Like, would they still get in over Cincinnati? What are you thinking?
So I think because they're not Power 5, you're going to need a lot of things to happen. And say Utah were to win out, I think that you would also need USC to lose a couple more so that win doesn't look as good. And that's kind of what you have to do in these scenarios where if you're having a 2-win conference champion and you're not in the Power 5 and the only ranked wins you'll have are going to be against these other 2 teams that we're talking about. First of all, you need everybody else to win every other game. And I mean, with the competition they have, maybe you could say UCF at East Carolina, they could drop possibly. But say UCF, Cincinnati, and Tulane, all 3 of them win every game besides obviously when they play each other. That looks good because you could have at least 2 ranked wins in your pocket. And then you get to play them again for the conference championship. So maybe you would have 3 at that point, just depending on if a 3-loss American runner-up would still be ranked at that point. I think it just depends on the rest of the college football field. But I think what would look good is if, say, you would need Oregon to maybe beat UCLA, so then they both have 1 loss. And then you would need one of those to win out. Say UCLA drops another one, Oregon wins out, and then loses the Pac-12 championship maybe to USC, and to Utah. They already have 2 losses. Then maybe you could argue because Oregon had lost before that as well, maybe they won't be ranked at that point. So Utah only has 1 win over a ranked team, which is USC. So maybe you could put them over them. So that would knock them out of the field. You knock Pac-12 out. Then you would need Michigan to lose a couple of games because you can't have, like Jacob was saying, a one loss or a zero loss SEC team in the championship, or you can't have a one loss conference runner up because I think they put a one loss conference runner up over a one loss American winner, in my opinion. Um, it happened to work out really well last year that Oklahoma State won the Big 12 championship. They had two losses. Obviously, UCF didn't have doesn't have or UCF, Tulane, or Cincinnati doesn't have that ranked win over like Notre Dame like they did last year. So this is why you need other conferences to lose a lot more games. And I mean, honestly, with the field that's going on this year, it looks like they're going to lose a lot of games this year. Jacob, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it's tough for them this year. They're not undefeated, right? And it's like, I mean, UCF won the national championship in 2017 by going undefeated. Cincinnati made the playoff last year, but I mean, yeah, it's going to be tough, really tough for them. A lot of got teams that get the benefit of the doubt for being Power Five. They got to get around. They got to sneak around. That could have a loss or two.
And I know we don't like to talk about good losses, but I think relatively UCF and Cincinnati have better losses than Tulane. I mean, you lose to Louisville, you lose to Arkansas. That looks a lot better losing to a Power Five team than losing to whoever Tulane lost to. I think it was um, some conference or in the yeah, it was Southern Mississippi by 3. So that I think is a better scenario. Is UCF and Cincinnati probably have a better chance than Tulane, but if they win out, they may have a chance if the other things were to happen. I'm just not sure. Anyways, thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, comment if you disagree. I mean, maybe do you think an American team can make the playoffs? I think they can, but a lot of things have to happen around the country. Jacob, you got anything else for us?
I think that's it. Thanks everybody for watching. Peace.
Peace.